The flash traffic hit Captain Sarah Chen's tablet at 03:47 hours. Red text scrolling across the screen in the Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Kestrel. Taliban offensive had broken through the defensive line 12 kilometers north. Estimated time to base 90 minutes. She read it twice, the words not changing, then looked up at Colonel Morrison standing beside the operations map. Morrison's finger traced the enemy advance markers moving south toward their position. Artillery support was already displaced, air assets committed elsewhere, no reinforcements available within the critical window. He turned to his operations officer and spoke the words that turned organized military procedure into controlled chaos. Immediate evacuation, priority alpha, all air assets launching in 45 minutes, personnel only, equipment abandoned in place. The TOC erupted into coordinated urgency as staff officers grabbed radios and began transmitting movement orders across 8 different frequencies. Chun felt her spotter, Corporal Davis, appear at her shoulder, already wearing his kit and carrying her rifle case. They'd trained for emergency extractions a dozen times, the muscle memory taking over even as her mind processed the implications of leaving millions of dollars in equipment for the Taliban to claim as trophies. Outside, the flight line transformed into organized pandemonium as 400 personnel materialized from barracks and fighting positions, moving toward designated helicopter landing zones with the efficiency of countless rehearsals. Chen's sniper team was directed to Bird 7, a CH-47 Chinook designated for 3rd Battalion elements, and they joined the flow of Marines sprinting across the compound with weapons and assault packs. Halfway to the flight line, Chen noticed something that registered as wrong without her conscious mind identifying why. 2nd Battalion's staging area sat oddly quiet, the rows of sandbag positions empty when they should have been streaming with personnel. She filed the observation away as her boots hit the Chinook's ramp, and she moved into the cargo area, finding her seat among 40 other Marines packed shoulder to shoulder. Bird 7's engines cycled up to full power at 0429, the airframe shuddering as the pilots pulled pitch and lifted the aircraft into the pre-dawn darkness. Chun twisted her seat to look through the porthole window, counting the helicopters rising from FOB Kestrel into formation. 1, 2, 3, for aircraft visible against the lighter eastern sky. The manifest had called for 8. Davis leaned close to shout over the rotor noise, his face tight with the same unease that had started building in Chen's chest. Something's wrong with the count. The words competed with engine roar and vibration, but Chen heard them clearly enough. She shook her head, dismissing the concern as fog of war confusion, the inevitable chaos of combat evacuations where nothing ever matched the perfect plan briefed in operations orders. But the quiet staging area nagged at her awareness as Bird 7 climbed to altitude and turned south, putting kilometers between the formation and FOB Kestrel. 2nd Battalion should have been loading simultaneously, their 480 Marines filling the other 4 helicopters in the 8-bird package. The math was simple, the organization standard, each Chinook carrying roughly 60 personnel in emergency configuration. The flight took 38 minutes, following terrain through valleys to avoid enemy observation, before the 4 helicopters descended toward Rally Point Falcon 45 kilometers south of FOB Kestrel. The landing zone appeared through the dawn light, a cleared area marked with infrared strobes visible through Chen's night vision, and Bird 7 flared hard before touching down in a cloud of dust and loose gravel. Chen moved down the ramp with her team, joining the flow of Marines spreading across the assembly area as unit leaders began accountability checks. The organized chaos of arrival played out according to doctrine, personnel finding their designated sectors while senior leadership established command presence and communications. As Chun walked through the darkness of those early morning moments, she thought about how different this was from growing up in Sacramento, California, where the biggest rush was morning traffic on Interstate 80. Nothing in civilian life prepared you for racing against an enemy advance, for making decisions measured in minutes instead of hours. It made her wonder where everyone came from, whether they'd grown up in places where split-second choices determined everything, or if they'd learned it here, in places like Helmand Province, where time compressed and expanded based on how close the Taliban was to your position. Battalion Executive Officer Captain Rodriguez stood near the operations vehicle conducting roll call, checking names against the manifest on his tablet. 287 personnel accounted for, all present from 3rd Battalion and attached support elements. Chun approached Rodriguez as he finished the count, intending to ask the question that had been building since they lifted off from FOB Kestrel. "Where's 2nd Battalion?" she asked, keeping her voice level despite the tightness spreading through her chest. Rodriguez looked up from his tablet, started to answer with the automatic assurance that they'd arrive shortly on the follow-on birds, then stopped. His face changed as he accessed the flight operations log, the color draining from his features in the growing dawnlight. He turned the tablet so Chun could see both documents simultaneously. The evacuation manifest listed 8 helicopters, 4 for 3rd Battalion and 4 for 2nd Battalion. Standard load planning for 480 personnel. But the flight operations log showed only 4 aircraft departed FOB Kestrel. Communications failure meant 2nd Battalion never received the launch order. Rodriguez's hands moved across the tablet with increasing urgency, pulling up personnel rosters and comparing them against who stood in the assembly area around them. His voice went flat as he spoke the calculation aloud. 480 Marines still at FOB Kestrel with Taliban forces now estimated 34 minutes from overrunning the base. He grabbed his radio immediately, establishing contact with Colonel Morrison, who was 200 kilometers away at Camp Dwyer, coordinating higher-level operations. Morrison's voice came through clear on the command net, ordering them to hold position while he worked the problem through higher headquarters for emergency extraction assets. Rodriguez asked the question that Sean was already forming. How long for new extraction? Morrison's answer carried the weight of impossible mathematics. Minimum 6 hours to coordinate quick reaction force helicopters from other areas of operation, pull them from existing missions, plan the approach, and execute the pickup. Taliban forces would reach FOB Kestrel in 30 minutes according to current intelligence estimates. Chun stood beside Rodriguez in the assembly area at Rally Point Falcon, listening to Morrison's voice explain the coordination requirements while her mind calculated what 6 hours meant for 480 Marines with no heavy weapons, no artillery support, and no air cover facing a Taliban force that had just broken through prepared defensive positions 12 kilometers north. The answer was simple and absolute. They would all die. Chun stared at the map spread across the hood of Rodriguez's Humvee, her finger tracing the route from Rally Point Falcon back north to FOB Kestrel. 45 kilometers of desert highway and mountain passes, terrain she'd memorized during 3 months of operations in Helmand Province. The ridgeline, designated Ridge 7, sat 800 meters from FOB Kestrel's perimeter, elevated 300 meters above the valley floor with clear sight lines across every approach vector. She'd used that position twice before for overwatch missions, knew the exact rock formation that provided cover and concealment while offering perfect fields of fire. From Ridge 7, a competent marksman could interdict enemy forces approaching the FOB from any direction. The position wasn't perfect, but it was viable, and viable was infinitely better than letting 480 Marines die because communications had failed during an emergency evacuation. Rodriguez stood beside her studying the same map, his face tight with the calculations running through his mind. Morrison's orders had been explicit. Hold position at Rally Point Falcon. Wait for higher headquarters to coordinate proper extraction with adequate assets and planning. Standard procedure, reasonable command guidance, completely inadequate for the timeline they faced. Chun spoke without looking up from the map, keeping her voice level and professional. She could return via ground vehicle to Ridge 7, establish overwatch position, provide sniper support and communications relay until rescue arrived. The words hung in the morning air between them, both officers understanding exactly what she was proposing and what it meant. Rodriguez's response came immediately. citing Morrison's explicit order for everyone to hold position. Leaving would constitute desertion during combat operations, the kind of career-ending decision that resulted in court-martial at minimum and dishonorable discharge at maximum. He wasn't arguing against her logic or her tactical assessment. He was stating the legal reality of what she was suggesting. Chun straightened from the map and looked directly at Rodriguez, her voice formal as she made the request for the record. She was asking permission to return to FOB Kestrel and provide support to 2nd Battalion. Rodriguez denied permission per Morrison's direct orders, his words equally formal, both of them aware that Davis stood close enough to witness the exchange and testify to it later. She walked to the equipment pile, where their gear had been staged, selecting only what she needed. Her M40A5 rifle, the weapon she'd carried for 18 months and knew better than any piece of equipment she'd ever owned. The spotting scope that let her read wind and mirage at distances beyond 1,000 meters. Radio with spare batteries for maintaining contact. 300 rounds of match-grade ammunition, water, and minimal medical supplies. Everything fit into her assault pack with room for the ammunition she'd need if this became a sustained engagement. Davis started to follow her toward the vehicle, already calculating his role and what was about to happen. But Chin stopped him with a direct order. "Stay here." The words were clear and unambiguous, removing him from any complicity in her decision. This was her choice, her career, her court-martial if it came to that. Rodriguez physically positioned himself in front of the Humvee as Chun approached with her gear, making one final attempt to prevent what they both knew was about to occur. He couldn't let her do this. The words carrying the weight of command authority and genuine concern for both her safety and her career. Chin's response was simple and direct. She wasn't asking anymore. The Humvee's engine fired on the first attempt, the vehicle built for abuse and reliable even under the worst conditions. Rodriguez continued shouting orders as Chin shifted into gear, his voice carrying across the assembly area and drawing attention from nearby Marines who turned to watch. She ignored the orders, focusing on the route north that would take her back toward FOB Kestrel and Ridge 7. 0526 when she drove out of Rally Point Falcon, dust billowing behind the Humvee as she accelerated onto the highway. Rodriguez's voice faded behind her, replaced by engine noise and the sound of tires on broken pavement. The eastern sky was lighter now, dawn spreading across the desert landscape and revealing the mountains ahead. She pushed the Humvee to dangerous speeds on Route Silver, the main supply road that connected the southern bases to forward operating bases like Kestrel. 70 kilometers per hour on sections designed for convoy speeds half that fast, the vehicle shuddering over rough patches and damaged pavement. Smoke marked the horizon ahead, visible now in the growing daylight, and Chin recognized it as FOB Kestrel's location even though she couldn't see the base itself yet. Her watch read 0547, which meant Taliban forces should be hitting the base within minutes if the intelligence estimates were accurate. 45 kilometers separated her from Ridge 7, and she needed to cover that distance and climb 300 vertical meters before she could do anything useful. The turnoff appeared at 0551, an unmarked dirt track that led east from Route Silver toward the ridgeline. Chun yanked the wheel hard, the Humvee skidding through loose gravel before finding traction on the slope. The vehicle climbed for 3 minutes before the terrain became too steep, forcing her to abandon it at the base of Ridge 7. She grabbed her pack and rifle, checking her watch as she started the climb. 0554. The slope ahead looked manageable in daylight, a combination of loose scree and solid rock that would require careful movement, but nothing technically difficult. With 45 pounds of equipment distributed between her pack and rifle, she estimated 18 minutes to reach the summit position she remembered from previous operations. The climb consumed her entire focus, each step calculated to maintain steady progress without exhausting herself before reaching the position. Her breathing found a rhythm that matched her pace, steady and controlled despite the burning in her legs and the weight pulling at her shoulders. Loose rocks scattered beneath her boots, tumbling down the slope behind her, but she kept moving upward toward the ridgeline silhouetted against the brightening sky. She reached the summit at 0609, dropping her pack beside the rock formation that would serve as her position. The view opened up below her, FOB Kestrel visible 800 meters away and 1,200 meters out across the valley floor. Through her spotting scope, Chun could see approximately 480 Marines consolidated in the FOB center, creating a defensive perimeter around the landing zones using whatever cover they could find among the abandoned equipment. Taliban forces approached from the north, dark shapes moving through the terrain in loose formation. Chun counted methodically, marking each group and estimating their strength. 200 fighters in the initial wave, 600 meters from the FOB perimeter, and closing steadily. The Marines below had created defensive positions, but without heavy weapons or supporting fires. They were preparing to fight with only small arms against a force that outnumbered them and held tactical initiative. Chun switched her radio to the FOB's tactical frequency, immediately hearing Major Kirkwood's voice attempting to organize the defense. He was 2nd Battalion's executive officer, calm under pressure, but clearly working with limited options and no information about rescue timeline. The Marines had ammunition and discipline, but Kirkwood had no idea whether rescue was coming in 30 minutes or 30 hours. Chun keyed her radio, identifying herself and her position on Ridge 7 overlooking his perimeter. She had eyes on his defensive positions and could see the Taliban force approaching from the north. Kirkwood's response carried confusion and desperate hope in equal measure, asking if rescue was inbound and when extraction would arrive. 6 hours minimum. Chun transmitted, knowing the words would hit Kirkwood like a physical blow. They needed to survive until then, and she would do everything possible to help them make it. Chun settled into her shooting position behind the rock formation, the stones still cool from the night air despite the sun climbing above the eastern ridges. Her rifle rested on its bipod, the scope adjusted for the range and elevation she'd already calculated. 847 meters to the Taliban command element she'd identified through her spotting scope, 3 fighters clustered together with radio equipment and binoculars directing the advancing forces. The wind was calm at this hour, less than 3 knots from the west, barely enough to affect her shot at this distance. She'd made harder shots during training, much harder shots during her deployment, but never with 480 lives depending on her accuracy. The reticle settled on the center fighter, the one holding the radio and gesturing to units spread across the approach terrain. Her breathing slowed to the rhythm she'd practiced 10,000 times, the trigger press smooth and steady through its breaking point. The rifle fired with familiar recoil, and through the scope Chun watched the Taliban commander drop as the round impacted. The entire advance stopped immediately, fighters diving for cover or freezing in confusion as their leadership disappeared. Kirkwood's voice came through her radio within seconds, reporting that enemy forces had halted their advance. He asked if that was her doing, the question carrying equal parts hope and disbelief. Chun confirmed the shot and provided tactical assessment of the enemy positions now visible across the northern approach. She'd bought them time, but Taliban forces would reorganize quickly once they identified the threat. She directed Kirkwood to concentrate his Marines on the south perimeter where terrain provided better cover against ground assault. The northern side, she could interdict from her elevated position, creating overlapping fields of fire that would make enemy movement costly. Kirkwood acknowledged immediately, already issuing orders to his unit commanders over the internal net. Through her scope, Chun watched the Marines below redistribute their forces, 180 personnel moving to reinforce the southern defensive positions while 300 remained covering the north and east approaches. The movement took 6 minutes, executed with the precision of trained infantry who understood that speed and organization meant survival. Taliban forces resumed their advance at 0629, learning from their initial mistake. They moved more dispersed now, using available cover and avoiding clustering in groups that made easy targets. Chun engaged a fighter attempting to flank the eastern perimeter, The range now 912 meters, requiring slight adjustment for the increased distance. The round found its target, and the flanking attempt collapsed as other fighters retreated to more defensible positions. Over the next 40 minutes, Chun worked methodically through the target array, presenting itself across the valley floor. A fighter carrying RPG equipment eliminated at 863 meters. Two fighters attempting to establish a machine gun position with clear sight lines to the FOB. Both dropped before they could bring the weapon into action. A squad leader organizing a coordinated assault from Awadi, taken at 947 meters while he gestured directions to his team. She fired 23 rounds during that engagement window, eliminating 19 Taliban fighters and preventing two serious flanking attempts that would have compromised the defensive perimeter. Each shot required calculation and patience, waiting for the target to present itself clearly before pressing the trigger. Ammunition conservation was critical because she brought only 300 rounds total, and she had no idea how long this defense would need to continue. At 0709, the Taliban advance stalled at 250 meters from the FOB perimeter. Chen watched through her scope as the remaining fighters pulled back to 600 meters and stopped, clearly reassessing their tactics in the face of precision fire they couldn't locate or suppress. The withdrawal wasn't defeat, just tactical adjustment, but it gave the Marines below precious breathing room to improve their positions and prepare for the next assault. Kirkwood requested status check over the radio, his voice steady despite the intensity of the last hour. Chen reported his Marines had taken 0 casualties, their defensive positions were holding, and ammunition levels remained adequate. She asked for his ammunition status and received confirmation that his forces had sufficient small arms rounds, but no heavy weapons or supporting equipment. Everything that required a crew or vehicle had been abandoned during the evacuation. Chen's own status was more concerning. She'd fired 23 rounds, which meant she had 277 remaining from her initial load. At the current expenditure rate, she could sustain maybe 4 more engagements of similar intensity before ammunition became critical. She kept that calculation to herself, seeing no benefit in adding another complication to Kirkwood's already overwhelming situation. The valley settled into tense quiet after the Taliban withdrew, both sides consolidating and preparing for the next phase. Chen used the lull to hydrate and adjust her position slightly, moving 3 meters to a secondary shooting location that offered different angles and prevented the enemy from pinpointing her exact position through muzzle flash analysis. She checked her watch. 0721. Morrison's estimated rescue time was 1,100 hours, which meant 3 hours and 39 minutes remained until extraction. The Taliban forces at 600 meters weren't retreating. They were regrouping and reinforcing for a more coordinated assault. Chen had seen this pattern before during previous engagements in Helmand province. The enemy probed defenses, absorbed casualties, then adapted tactics for a larger attack designed to overwhelm through superior numbers and better coordination. Through her spotting scope, she observed additional Taliban fighters arriving from the north, joining the forces already staged at 600 meters. The enemy was building combat power for something bigger than the initial probing attack. She counted at least 300 fighters now visible, possibly more concealed in dead ground beyond her observation range. Kirkwood's voice came through the radio with a question he probably already knew the answer to. Could she hold them again if they came with greater numbers? Chen considered several possible responses before settling on tactical honesty. Not at these numbers with her current ammunition. If the Taliban committed 400 fighters in a coordinated assault, she could attrit them significantly, but couldn't stop the attack entirely. The Marines below would need to hold sectors she couldn't cover from her position. Kirkwood acknowledged without comment, and Chen heard him issuing orders over the internal net to prepare for sustained close combat. The Marines were checking ammunition, redistributing resources, and preparing for the worst possibility. They were professionals who understood their situation clearly. Surrounded, outnumbered, no heavy weapons, no air support, and rescue hours away. Their survival depended on holding discipline under pressure and making the enemy pay for every meter of ground. Chen returned to glassing the Taliban positions, identifying key personnel and likely assault routes. She had 277 rounds and approximately 3 hours to make them count. The mathematics were simple and brutal. She needed to eliminate enough enemy fighters to reduce their combat effectiveness below the threshold required to overrun 480 Marines defending prepared positions. The sun climbed higher above the ridgeline, temperature rising as morning advanced toward midday. Chun felt sweat beginning to gather under her equipment despite the relatively cool air at this elevation. Below in the valley, both sides prepared for the next engagement that would determine whether rescue arrived in time or whether Ridge 7 became the location where she made her final stand alongside 480 Marines she'd never met but refused to abandon. At 0812, Chun observed Taliban forces massing at 800 meters, their numbers significantly larger than the first wave. She counted methodically through her spotting scope, marking groups and estimating total strength. 400 fighters minimum, possibly more concealed in terrain, folds beyond her direct observation. They were organizing into assault elements with better coordination than the initial probe, leaders positioned throughout the formation to maintain control during the advance. She keyed her radio to update Kirkwood on the enemy strength assessment. His response was a single question asking if she could hold them at these numbers. Chun gave him tactical honesty. Not at these numbers with her current ammunition status. She had 277 rounds remaining, enough to attrit the enemy significantly, but insufficient to stop a coordinated assault by 400 fighters across multiple approach vectors. Kirkwood acknowledged, and Chun heard him issuing orders over the internal net, redistributing his Marines to cover likely breach points and preparing them for close combat. The professionalism in his voice remained steady despite the mathematics working against them. 480 defenders with small arms against 400 attackers supported by crew-served weapons made for brutal calculus when the defenders had no supporting fires. Chen's radio crackled with a new voice, Colonel Morrison transmitting directly on the tactical frequency she'd been using with Kirkwood. His words carried the weight of command authority and barely controlled anger. He ordered her to immediately withdraw from her position and return to Rally Point Falcon. The order was explicit, unambiguous, and completely unacceptable given the tactical situation developing below her position. She requested permission to remain until extraction arrived at 1100 hours, keeping her voice professional and deferential. Morrison denied the request, stating she was already facing court-martial for desertion and disobeying orders, and continuing would only make her legal situation worse. The conversation was being recorded on multiple systems, every word creating evidence for future prosecution. Chun asked Morrison what happened to 480 Marines if she withdrew now with no Overwatch support. Morrison responded that the Quick Reaction Force would extract them as planned. Chen's reply cut through the command authority and legal threats with simple tactical reality. The QRF arrived in 3 hours, but Taliban forces would attack in minutes. She was asking what happened in those 3 hours without her fire support. Morrison repeated his direct order to withdraw immediately, his voice hardening with the expectation of compliance. Chen responded that she would comply after extraction completed at 1100 hours, then terminated radio contact before Morrison could respond further. She'd just refused a direct order from Colonel. The refusal recorded and witnessed, adding another charge to the court-martial that seemed increasingly inevitable if she survived the morning. The Taliban's second wave attacked at 0824, advancing across multiple approach vectors with better tactical discipline than their initial assault. Chun began engaging priority targets, focusing on fighters carrying crew-served weapons and leaders attempting to coordinate the assault. Machine gun team at 893 meters. Both crew members eliminated before they could establish firing position. RPG carrier at 917 meters. Dropped as he prepared to engage the defensive perimeter below. She worked through the target array with methodical efficiency. Each shot calculated for maximum tactical impact, rather than simple body count. Squad leaders directing their elements. Eliminated to create confusion and disorganization. Fighters attempting to establish supporting fire positions, taken before they could bring weapons to bear. The Taliban advance continued, but lost cohesion as key personnel disappeared under precision fire they couldn't suppress or avoid. Over 35 minutes, Chun fired 31 rounds, eliminating 24 Taliban fighters selected for their tactical importance to the assault. But the enemy force was simply too large to stop through attrition alone. They pressed forward through casualties, accepting losses as the price of overwhelming the defensive perimeter through superior numbers. By 08:59, Taliban forces had closed to 150 meters from the FOB perimeter, near the effective range where the Marine small arms could engage effectively. Chun could hear sustained gunfire through her radio as Kirkwood's forces opened fire on the approaching assault. The sound carried across the valley, even at her elevated position, the distinctive crack of M4 rifles mixing with the heavier reports of enemy weapons. Chun shifted her focus to targets attempting to flank the eastern perimeter, where terrain provided concealment almost to the defensive line. 3 fighters moving through a wadi, eliminated at ranges under 400 meters as they emerged from cover. The eastern flank stabilized as other Taliban fighters recognized the danger and withdrew from that approach. She reached for a fresh magazine and felt the weight of her ammunition supply, lighter now than when she'd started the morning. 12 rounds remained in her current magazine, 5 full magazines in her chest rig. 62 rounds total with Taliban forces still pressing the attack. Chun keyed her radio to inform Kirkwood of her ammunition status, the information he needed to understand her declining capability to provide supporting fire. Kirkwood asked what happened when she ran out of ammunition. Chun's response was matter-of-fact. She would transition to her M9 pistol and engage targets at closer range. The answer was tactically absurd, given the distances involved, but it was the only option available short of abandoning her position. Kirkwood didn't comment on the impossibility of effective pistol fire at ranges measured in hundreds of meters. The Taliban assault continued for another 20 minutes before momentum broke under combined pressure from Chun's precision fire and sustained small arms engagement from the Marines below. Enemy forces withdrew to 400 meters at 0919, dragging casualties and regrouping once again. Chun counted approximately 75 Taliban fighters down across the battlefield, many of them attributable to her fire, but others falling to the Marines defending the perimeter. She conducted weapons maintenance during the lull, cleaning carbon buildup from the bolt, and checking her scope mounting for any shift from sustained firing. The rifle remained mechanically sound despite the morning's use, built for exactly this kind of sustained precision engagement. Her own condition was more concerning. Dehydration was becoming noticeable despite regular water intake. The stress and physical exertion of maintaining shooting position for 3 hours taking cumulative toll. Kirkwood transmitted casualty report over the radio. 11 Marines wounded, 0 killed, defensive positions intact with ammunition adequate for continued defense. The numbers were remarkably favorable given the intensity of engagement, testament to the Marines' tactical discipline and the defensive advantages of prepared positions. But everyone involved understood those advantages eroded with each successive assault as ammunition depleted and fatigue accumulated. Checker watch, 0923. 1 hour and 37 minutes until scheduled extraction, assuming Morrison's coordination efforts succeeded and the QRF arrived on time. She had 62 rounds of rifle ammunition remaining and Taliban forces staging at 400 meters for what would inevitably be another assault. Through her spotting scope, she observed enemy fighters receiving reinforcements from the north, fresh troops arriving to replace casualties and increase combat power. The Taliban weren't withdrawing or conceding the battlefield. They were building toward a final assault designed to overwhelm the FOB before rescue arrived, and they had enough forces remaining to make that attempt credible. Chun settled back into shooting position, checking her scope 0 and adjusting her hydration pack for easier access. The sun had climbed high enough to create heat shimmer in the valley below, complicating range estimation and requiring constant adjustment to maintain accuracy. She ran calculations in her mind, estimating engagement rates and ammunition expenditure for different assault scenarios. 62 rounds against potentially 300 Taliban fighters meant she needed to average nearly 5 casualties per round to significantly impact enemy combat effectiveness. That calculation assumed perfect shot placement and ignored the tactical reality that many targets would be concealed or moving in ways that prevented clean engagement. The mathematics suggested she would run dry before the Taliban exhausted their assault capability. But mathematics didn't account for everything. Precision fire created psychological impact beyond simple casualty counts, degrading enemy morale and introducing hesitation into their tactical decision-making. Every leader eliminated created confusion. Every crew-served weapon destroyed reduced their offensive capability disproportionate to single casualties. Chun would make her 62 rounds count for more than their simple number suggested, because 480 Marines below her position deserved every possible advantage she could provide. Colonel Morrison stood in the command center at Camp Dwyer, 200 kilometers south of FOB Kestrel, watching drone footage display across 3 large monitors. The Predator had been orbiting above the FOB for 40 minutes now, providing real-time surveillance of the tactical situation developing in the valley. He watched Taliban forces staging at 400 meters while the Marines held defensive positions in the center of the abandoned base. His operations officer, Lieutenant Colonel Sanders, worked coordination with 3 different aviation units, attempting to assemble enough helicopters for emergency extraction of 480 personnel from a hot landing zone. Every available aircraft was committed to other missions across Regional Command Southwest, and pulling them required command authority Sanders didn't possess. Morrison had escalated the request to division level 30 minutes ago and was still waiting for response. Captain Rodriguez entered the command center at 0730, having driven from Rally Point Falcon after Morrison summoned him for briefing on the extraction planning. Morrison glanced up from the monitors and immediately directed Rodriguez to confirm all scout sniper teams were accounted for at the rally point. He needed verification that his personnel accountability was correct before finalizing coordination with higher headquarters. Rodriguez hesitated for 3 seconds before responding, the pause long enough that Morrison knew something was wrong before words were spoken. Rodriguez reported that Captain Chun had departed Rally Point Falcon against orders at 0526, refusing his direct command to remain in place. Morrison felt anger surge through his chest, the kind that came from subordinates, creating complications during crisis situations that demanded absolute discipline. The intelligence officer, Lieutenant Cole, interrupted before Morrison could respond to Rodriguez's report, pointing at the leftmost monitor displaying drone footage. Cole had identified an anomaly on Ridge 7 overlooking FOB Kestrel, a single heat signature with ballistic profile consistent with sniper rifle. Morrison moved to Cole's workstation and watched as the intelligence officer played back footage showing muzzle flashes from the ridgeline position correlating precisely with Taliban casualties in the valley below. Someone was providing overwatch support to the surrounding Marines. And based on Rodriguez's report that someone was Captain Chun conducting unauthorized combat operations after refusing orders from 2 different officers. Morrison watched the drone footage replay 3 separate engagements where precision fire from Ridge 7 eliminated Taliban fighters attempting to flank the defensive perimeter. He demanded Rodriguez explain why he hadn't physically stopped Chun from leaving Rally Point Falcon. Rodriguez admitted he tried but failed, stating Chun had made clear she was proceeding regardless of orders. Morrison felt the situation spiraling beyond his control, legal and tactical considerations colliding in ways that made clean command decisions impossible. Morrison contacted Kirkwood directly on the tactical net, asking if he was in communication with someone on Ridge 7. Kirkwood confirmed immediately. reporting Captain Chun had been providing fire support since 0612 hours, and her precision engagement was the primary reason his Marines had sustained only 11 wounded with 0 killed. Morrison terminated the connection and turned back to the drone monitors. The tactical situation was clear on the displays. Chin's unauthorized action had kept 480 Marines alive through 2 sustained Taliban assaults. Her precision fire had eliminated approximately 90 enemy fighters and prevented multiple flanking attempts that would have compromised the defensive perimeter. Without her intervention, Taliban forces would likely have overrun the FOB within the first hour. But the legal situation was equally clear. Chin had deserted her assigned unit during combat operations, disobeyed direct orders from Captain Rodriguez, driven into active combat zone without authorization, and most critically had refused Morrison's own direct order to withdraw transmitted just 40 minutes ago. The refusal was recorded on multiple systems with perfect clarity, eliminating any possibility of claiming miscommunication or confusion. Morrison pulled up the regulations governing military justice during combat operations, reading through the articles that applied to Chin's actions. Desertion in face of enemy carried potential death penalty, though modern application typically resulted in lengthy confinement. Disobeying direct orders from superior officers during combat operations was court-martial mandatory. Operating in combat zone without authorization violated multiple regulations simultaneously. Sanders approached with update on extraction coordination. Division had allocated 8 CH-47 Chinooks from 3 different bases, with 4 AH-64 Apache gunships providing escort. Earliest possible extraction time was 1100 hours, giving the Marines at FOB Kestrel approximately 90 additional minutes to hold their position. Sanders asked if they should order Chun to withdraw now that rescue was confirmed. Morrison considered the question while watching drone footage display another engagement, where Chin's fire stopped the Taliban probe toward the eastern perimeter. He calculated the tactical equation with brutal honesty. If Chun withdrew now, Taliban forces would likely overrun the FOB before extraction arrived. If Chun remained, she continued accumulating charges that would end her career and possibly her freedom. He made the decision that command authority demanded. Morrison ordered Sanders to maintain current tactical disposition, which meant Chin would continue providing overwatch until extraction completed. He would address her insubordination after 480 Marines were safely evacuated. Mission first, discipline second. Even when that order felt like validating the exact behavior he should be punishing. Rodriguez remained standing near the monitors, watching the tactical situation play out in real time. Morrison told him to return to Rally Point Falcon and prepare to receive the rescued Marines when helicopters diverted there after extraction. Rodriguez acknowledged, but didn't move immediately, his attention fixed on the drone display showing Chin's position on Ridge 7. Morrison understood Rodriguez's concern. Chin was former student from Scout Sniper School where Rodriguez had been instructor before his current assignment. She'd been top graduate in her class, exceptional marksman with tactical judgment that impressed the cadre. Rodriguez had written the evaluation that recommended her for Scout Sniper teams, and now he was watching her destroy a promising career by refusing orders to save Marines she'd never met. The command center settled into tense watch as drone footage continued streaming across the monitors. Taliban forces were reorganizing again at 600 meters, bringing forward additional fighters to replace casualties. Intelligence estimates suggested enemy reinforcements were still arriving from the north, building combat power for another assault attempt. Chin's ammunition status was unknown, but certainly declining after 3 hours of sustained engagement. Morrison had watched her fire approximately 80 rounds based on muzzle flash counts from the drone footage, and Scout snipers typically carry between 200 and 400 rounds depending on mission requirements. She would run dry eventually, probably soon, and then 480 Marines would face Taliban assault with only their small arms for defense. Sanders suggested they could coordinate emergency ammunition resupply to Chin's position. 2 Chinooks could make low pass and drop supplies near Ridge 7. The suggestion was tactically sound and completely insane from command authority perspective. Morrison would be using military assets to support and sustain an unauthorized combat operation by an officer actively defying his direct orders. Morrison found himself in the impossible position where correct legal action conflicted absolutely with tactical necessity. Ordering Chin's withdrawal was proper exercise of command authority, but would likely result in mass casualties at FOB Kestrel. Supporting her unauthorized action with supply drops validated insubordination, but kept Marines alive until rescue arrived. He made the second decision that prioritized mission over discipline, authorizing Sanders to coordinate ammunition resupply to Ridge 7. Two CH-47 Chinooks would divert from current tasking and conduct low-level supply drop at Chin's position within 30 minutes. Morrison knew the decision created evidence trail that would complicate any court-martial proceedings, but 480 Marines deserved every possible advantage regardless of legal complications. Rodriguez spoke quietly from his position near the monitors, thanking Morrison for the decision. Morrison didn't respond, his attention fixed on the drone display showing Taliban forces massing for what appeared to be preparation for major assault. The enemy recognized they were running out of time before American reinforcements arrived, and they were committing everything available for final push to overrun the FOB. Chen had approximately 30 minutes before ammunition resupply arrived, assuming the helicopters successfully penetrated to her position without getting shot down. She would need to hold against whatever Taliban assault developed with whatever rounds remained in her magazines. Morrison watched the tactical display and calculated odds that felt worse than the mathematics suggested they should be. Major General Patricia Vance received the emergency call from Colonel Morrison at 0907, the ringtone pulling her attention from the morning briefing at Regional Command Headquarters in Kandahar. She listened to Morrison's synopsis of the situation at FOB Kestrel, the abandoned Marines, and the unauthorized sniper providing overwatch from Ridge 7. Morrison's voice carried tension as he briefed the tactical success and legal complications simultaneously. Morrison requested formal authorization to charge Captain Chun with desertion and disobeying orders after extraction completed, wanting clear command backing for court-martial proceedings. Vance asked him to hold while she accessed the live drone feed, pulling up the Predator footage on her office display. The tactical picture appeared across her screen, Taliban forces massing at 600 meters while Marines held defensive positions in the FOB center. She watched replay footage showing muzzle flashes from Ridge 7 correlating with enemy casualties below. The precision and selection of targets impressed her from purely tactical perspective. Chun was engaging high-value targets, leaders, and crew-served weapons, maximizing impact of each round fired. Vance had commanded infantry units for 26 years and recognized exceptional marksmanship when she observed it. Her operations officer, Colonel Sanders, entered with analysis Vance had requested a tactical assessment of Chin's intervention impact. Sanders reported that Chin's precision fire had prevented FOB overrun between 0612 and 0830, with estimated 380 Taliban casualties attributable to her engagement. Without her fire support, probability calculations suggested the Marines would have been overrun within 90 minutes of first contact. Vance asked Sanders for current probability assessment if Chun was withdrawn immediately per Morrison's original order. Sanders pulled up his tablet and displayed the modeling his staff had run. 70% probability FOB Kestrel falls before 1100 extraction if Chun withdraws now, with projected casualties between 200 and 400 Marines. The mathematics were brutal but clear. She contacted Morrison directly, denying his request to order Chin's withdrawal from Ridge 7. Morrison's protest came immediately, arguing that allowing Chun to continue validated insubordination and undermined command authority across the entire theater. Vance understood his concern, but couldn't prioritize procedural compliance over 480 Marine lives. Morrison pressed the legal argument, stating Chun had deserted her unit during combat operations and refused direct orders from colonel-level command. These weren't minor infractions, but serious violations that demanded formal response. Vance acknowledged the legal reality while stating they would address those matters after 480 Marines were safely evacuated. Mission accomplishment took priority over disciplinary procedures. She ordered Morrison to coordinate ammunition resupply to Chen's position, diverting available helicopters to conduct emergency supply drop at Ridge 7. Morrison's silence on the radio lasted 4 seconds before he acknowledged, and Vance heard the frustration in his tone. She was ordering him to provide material support for unauthorized combat operations, creating evidence that would complicate any subsequent court-martial. Vance terminated the connection and turned to Sanders, directing him to monitor the tactical situation and provide updates every 15 minutes. She needed to brief her own commander on the developing situation, explaining why she'd countermanded a colonel's order and supported insubordination during active combat operations. The explanation would require careful framing to emphasize mission success over procedural violations. The broader implications concerned her beyond the immediate tactical situation. If Chen succeeded and received no punishment for disobeying orders, it established precedent that subordinates could ignore command guidance when they disagreed with tactical decisions. That precedent threatened military discipline at fundamental level, creating an environment where every junior officer might second-guess orders during crisis situations. But if Chun succeeded and was court-martialed despite saving 480 lives, it sent equally problematic message that following orders mattered more than mission accomplishment. Vance had spent her career emphasizing mission-type orders and tactical initiative, trusting subordinates to make decisions at their level. Chun had taken that philosophy to extreme conclusion, and Vance found herself unable to definitively say Chun was wrong. Sanders returned with update from drone surveillance. Taliban forces were staging what appeared to be final assault, committing approximately 400 fighters to coordinated attack across 3 approach vectors. Intelligence assessed this as Allen's attempt to overrun FOB before American rescue arrived. Chen's ammunition status was estimated critical based on observed fire rates, probably fewer than 20 rounds remaining. Vance watched the tactical display as Taliban forces began their advance at 0941. Chun engaged immediately, her muzzle flashes visible on thermal imaging as she fired at priority targets. The precision remained consistent despite hours of sustained shooting, each round carefully aimed at tactically significant enemy personnel. But the Taliban numbers were overwhelming, absorbing casualties and continuing advance through attrition. 2 CH-47 Chinooks appeared on the display at 0943, approaching Ridge 7 at low altitude to avoid enemy observation. The lead helicopter made gun run 200 meters from Chen's position. The crew chief, kicking ammunition, crate out the door, while the aircraft took sporadic small arms fire from Taliban positions below. The Chinook climbed away, trailing smoke from minor damage. Mission accomplished despite hostile fire. Sanders reported Chun had recovered the supply drop and returned to her position within 8 minutes, resuming fire on Taliban forces now within 300 meters of the FOB perimeter. The resupply had arrived barely in time, giving Chun renewed capability exactly when the tactical situation demanded maximum fire support. Vance observed the engagement develop over the next hour, watching Chen's impact on the battlefield through precise elimination of key targets. Taliban assault momentum broke at 10:47 as surviving forces withdrew beyond effective range, their offensive capability exhausted after absorbing catastrophic casualties. The Marines at FOB Kestrel had held, Chen's overwatch proving decisive in preventing penetration of the defensive perimeter. She checked the extraction timeline displayed on Sanders' tablet. Rescue helicopters were inbound. Estimated arrival at FOB Kestrel at 10:56, 4 minutes ahead of the planned 1100 timeline. The QRF had launched early and made better time than projected, reducing the window where Marines remained vulnerable to final Taliban assault attempt. Vance watched the extraction unfold on the drone display, 8 Chinooks descending into the FOB, while Apache gunships circled providing cover. The loading operation proceeded with disciplined efficiency, 480 Marines boarding designated aircraft within 23 minutes. Chun maintained overwatch throughout the extraction, her muzzle flashes appearing occasionally on thermal as she engaged Taliban elements attempting to interfere with the rescue. The final helicopter lifted off at 11:22. All personnel successfully evacuated with the 11 wounded receiving immediate medical attention aboard the aircraft. Mission success was complete and unambiguous. 480 Marines rescued with 0 killed. Tactical situation resolved through combination of defensive discipline and precision fire support. Sanders asked Vance what guidance she wanted provided to Morrison regarding Chin's status. The question carried weight beyond simple administrative process. Vance's answer would determine whether Chun faced court-martial or commendation, whether the precedent emphasized tactical initiative or command compliance. Vance considered the competing principles at stake. Military discipline demanded consequences for disobeying orders, maintaining command structure that enabled large-scale operations. Mission accomplishment demanded rewarding successful initiative, encouraging subordinates to take appropriate risks when situations required immediate action beyond normal procedures. She made her decision and directed Sanders to inform Morrison that she was assuming direct jurisdiction over Chin's case under General Officer Command Authority. Vance would personally review the matter and determine appropriate administrative action. The decision removed the case from Morrison's authority, preventing him from pursuing court-martial without her approval. Sanders departed to transmit the guidance, while Vance returned to watching the drone display. The helicopters carrying rescued Marines were climbing to altitude, heading south towards safety, while Taliban forces remained staged in the valley below. Chin's position on Ridge 7 showed single heat signature beginning descent from the summit. Her mission complete and survival assured for the immediate future. Vance knew the difficult conversations were just beginning. Chun had violated clear orders and military regulations, actions that couldn't be ignored without undermining command authority. But Chin had also saved 480 Marine lives through exceptional tactical skill and absolute commitment to mission accomplishment. Finding appropriate resolution that honored both principles would require careful judgment that balanced competing institutional interests. Chin arrived at Camp Leatherneck at 1347, driving the same Humvee she'd taken from Rally Point Falcon over 8 hours earlier. 2 military police sergeants waited at the main gate, directing her to park and surrender her weapon per Colonel Morrison's orders. She complied without comment, handing over her M40A5 rifle and sidearm before being escorted to the Legal Services building on the north side of the base. The legal office was sparse and functional, metal desk and chairs arranged in standard military configuration. Morrison stood near the window reviewing documents, turning as Chun entered with her MP escort. His face showed exhaustion and anger in equal measure. The combination of stress from coordinating emergency operations and frustration with subordinate who'd created legal crisis during tactical emergency. Morrison formally placed Chun under arrest and read the charges against her. Desertion in face of enemy, disobeying direct orders from superior officer during combat operations, unauthorized combat operations in active theater. Each charge carried potential for court-martial and significant confinement, collectively representing career-ending accusations regardless of specific outcomes. Chin listened without interruption, her face neutral as Morrison detailed the violations she committed. He offered her military defense attorney from the legal services staff. Chin declined representation and stated she would represent herself at any proceedings. Morrison asked if she understood the severity of charges and legal jeopardy she faced. Chun confirmed her understanding and added that she accepted all factual elements of the charges without contest. She had deserted her assigned unit, disobeyed orders from Rodriguez, refused Morrison's direct command to withdraw, and conducted unauthorized combat operations. All facts were accurate, and she wouldn't dispute them. Morrison scheduled preliminary hearing for 1500 hours, giving Chun 90 minutes to prepare whatever defense she intended to present. He stated his recommendation would be general court-martial with maximum allowable penalties given the severity of violations during active combat operations. Chun acknowledged without objection, her demeanor suggesting someone who had already calculated probable outcomes and accepted them as inevitable consequences. The preliminary hearing convened at 1500 in a larger room with capacity for witnesses and observers. Morrison presented his case methodically, beginning with Rodriguez's testimony about Chun leaving Rally Point Falcon against explicit orders. Rodriguez testified to the specific conversation where he denied Chun permission to return toward FOB Kestrel, her acknowledgement of his denial, and her subsequent departure despite his direct commands to remain. Morrison then presented radio recordings of his own order directing Chun to withdraw from Ridge 7, played through speakers with perfect audio clarity. Chen's voice responded acknowledging the order before stating she would comply after extraction completed at 1100, then terminating communication. The recording eliminated any possibility of claiming miscommunication or misunderstanding Morrison's intent. Drone footage followed, displayed on large monitor, showing Chen's position on Ridge 7 and muzzle flashes corresponding to her rifle fire. Morrison narrated the footage, documenting 5 hours of unauthorized combat operations conducted after refusing withdrawal orders. The evidence was comprehensive and damning, building overwhelming case that Chun had violated multiple regulations with full awareness of her actions. The hearing officer, Lieutenant Colonel Warner from Division Legal Staff, asked Chun if she contested any evidence presented. Chun stated that all evidence was accurate and factually correct. She had knowingly violated orders as documented. Warner asked why she took these actions given her clear understanding that they constituted serious violations. Chen's response was direct and unadorned with legal justification. 480 Marines would have died without immediate tactical support. An official rescue timeline made authorized channels insufficient to prevent mass casualties. She had capability to provide overwatch support from Ridge 7 and calculated that capability was worth her career and freedom if it kept those Marines alive until extraction arrived. Warner began formulating his next question when the hearing room door opened and Major Kirkwood entered without invitation. Morrison moved to object to the unauthorized witness appearance, but Warner indicated interest in hearing Kirkwood's testimony given his direct involvement in a tactical situation. Kirkwood approached the witness position and identified himself as 2nd Battalion Executive Officer and Commander of Forces at FOB Kestrel during the siege. Kirkwood testified that Chen's precision fire support was directly responsible for preventing Taliban forces from overrunning his defensive perimeter during 3 sustained assaults. Without her intervention, his Marines would have been overwhelmed within 90 minutes of first contact based on enemy numbers and his available defensive capabilities. He stated that every Marine at FOB Kestrel understood Chun had saved their lives through her unauthorized action. Morrison objected that tactical success didn't negate violations of military law and command structure. Kirkwood acknowledged the legal reality while stating that 480 Marines and their families held different perspective on whether Chen's actions should be punished or rewarded. The tension in the room shifted as Warner considered the competing principles Morrison and Kirkwood represented. General Vance entered the hearing at 1543, her appearance unannounced and immediately commanding attention from everyone present. Morrison and Warner came to attention as Vance moved to the front of the room, her presence transforming informal preliminary hearing into situation requiring general officer judgment. Vance addressed Morrison directly, stating she was assuming jurisdiction over Chen's case under command authority granted to general officers in combat theater. Morrison's prosecution would not proceed without her explicit approval, and she was reviewing all evidence personally before making determination about appropriate administrative action. Morrison protested the intervention, arguing that allowing Chun to escape consequences established dangerous precedent for subordinates ignoring orders whenever they disagreed with command decisions. Vance acknowledged his concern about precedent, while stating that precedent worked both directions. Court-martialing Chun for saving 480 Marine lives created equally problematic precedent about prioritizing procedural compliance over mission accomplishment. She announced her decision to administratively close the case against Chun. The actions, while technically unauthorized, were strategically necessary given the tactical situation and timeline constraints. Chun had exercised initiative consistent with mission-type orders philosophy that Marine Corps emphasized throughout its doctrine. No charges would proceed to court-martial. Morrison's face showed barely controlled anger as he stated this decision undermined command authority and military discipline. Vance responded that command authority existed to accomplish missions, and Chun had accomplished the mission of keeping 480 Marines alive until rescue arrived. Discipline served mission accomplishment, not the reverse. Warner asked about precedent for future situations where subordinates might claim similar justification for disobeying orders. Vance stated the precedent was narrow and specific. Chun had possessed unique capability, faced time-critical situation where authorized channels were insufficient, made accurate tactical assessment, and achieved complete mission success with 0 friendly fatalities. Those conditions rarely aligned, and claims of similar circumstances would receive careful scrutiny. She directed Morrison to release Chun from arrest and return her to normal duty status. Morrison acknowledged with visible reluctance, his professional discipline overriding personal disagreement with Vance's decision. Chun remained standing at attention throughout the exchange, her expression revealing nothing about her reaction to avoiding court-martial. Vance departed without additional comment, leaving Morrison and Warner to formally terminate the hearing. Morrison told Chun she was released, but made clear his disagreement with the outcome. Chun acknowledged and departed the legal building, collected her weapons from the MP desk, and returned to her assigned unit area. Rodriguez waited outside the legal building, having observed the hearing from rear seating. He asked Chun if she understood how close she'd come to career-ending punishment. Chun responded that she'd understood the risks before leaving Rally Point Falcon. Some decisions were worth making regardless of personal consequences. Rodriguez told her that Morrison would likely transfer to different command within weeks, the clash with Vance over her case, making their continued service together untenable. Chun said she regretted creating problems for Morrison, who had been attempting to maintain discipline during chaotic situation. Rodriguez pointed out that Morrison's focus on discipline had nearly resulted in 480 Marine deaths, suggesting his priorities required examination. Chun walked toward her barracks as afternoon heat pressed down across Camp Leatherneck. The rescued Marines from 2nd Battalion were billeted in temporary housing 300 meters away, and several recognized her as she passed. They called her name and approached, offering thanks and asking questions about Ridge 7. Chun kept responses brief, uncomfortable with attention focused on actions she considered straightforward tactical necessity. She reached her quarters and secured her rifle, sitting on her rack to process the day's events. 8 hours earlier, she'd been facing probable court-martial and potential imprisonment. Now she was cleared of charges and returning to normal operations. The whiplash of outcomes felt surreal against the sustained tension of 5 hours, providing overwatch, while Taliban forces attempted to overrun 480 Marines. Davis appeared in the doorway, asking if she was okay. Chun confirmed she was fine and asked about their team's next assignment. Davis said they were scheduled for routine patrol operations starting tomorrow, back to standard combat missions without the drama of unauthorized rescue operations. Chun appreciated the return to normalcy, even as she understood that Ridge 7 would define her career regardless of how many normal missions followed. 3 days after the extraction, General Vance convened an awards ceremony at Camp Leatherneck in a large assembly hall normally used for change of command events. Chun stood in formation with 11 other Marines, receiving decorations for actions during various operations across Helmand Province. She wore her dress uniform, the fabric stiff and uncomfortable after weeks of combat utilities, aware that every seat in the hall was filled with personnel who had come specifically to witness this ceremony. Vance read the citation for the Navy Cross, the Marine Corps' second highest decoration for valor in combat. The citation described Chen's actions on Ridge 7 in clinical military language that transformed 5 hours of sustained combat into formal recognition. Extraordinary heroism while serving as scout sniper attached to coalition forces during enemy assault on forward operating base Kestrel. Engaged enemy forces with precision rifle fire resulting in 187 confirmed enemy casualties and successful defense of 480 surrounded Marines until extraction completed. The citation made no mention that Chen's actions had been unauthorized. The official narrative framed her initiative as exemplary tactical judgment rather than insubordination, carefully constructed language that recognized her accomplishment without acknowledging the legal violations Vance had dismissed 3 days earlier. Chen understood the political necessity of the omission even as she recognized the dishonesty embedded in the selective description. Vance pinned the medal to Chen's uniform and rendered salute that Chen returned sharply. The assembled Marines erupted in applause that continued longer than protocol typically allowed, for 180 specific individuals among them who understood exactly what the medal represented. Chen maintained her military bearing throughout, standing at attention until Vance directed her to return to formation. After the ceremony concluded, Marines from 2nd Battalion approached Chen outside the assembly hall. Kirkwood led a group of 20 officers and senior enlisted, each wanting to personally thank her for Ridge 7. Chen accepted their gratitude with discomfort, repeatedly stating she had simply done what the tactical situation required. Kirkwood told her that simple or not, they would all be dead without her intervention, and that reality deserved acknowledgement beyond official citations. Morrison departed Camp Leatherneck 2 weeks after the ceremony, transferring to instructor duty at Marine Corps Base Quantico in Virginia. The official orders listed it as routine rotation for field-grade officer with extensive combat experience. Everyone involved understood the transfer was direct result of his clash with Vance over Chen's case, removing him from theater where their continued service together would create ongoing tension. Chen heard about Morrison's transfer from Rodriguez, who had received promotion to Major and Bronze Star for his role in initially reporting the abandoned Marines to higher command. Rodriguez's citation made no mention of his denial of Chen's request to return toward FOB Kestrel, that detail quietly omitted from his official record. The selective documentation bothered Rodriguez more than it bothered Chen, his discomfort with partial truth evident when they discussed the ceremony and awards. The 480 rescued Marines began compiling formal statements supporting Chen's actions, individual written accounts describing Ridge 7 from their perspective in the defensive perimeter below. The statements were compiled into 847 pages of documentation submitted to Marine Corps headquarters as unsolicited testimony to her tactical judgment and commitment to fellow Marines. Chen never requested the documentation and felt uncomfortable with the attention, but the Marines persisted in creating permanent record of what had occurred. 6 weeks after FOB Kestrel, Marine Corps headquarters issued new tactical guidance distributed throughout the theater. Field commanders were explicitly authorized to deviate from evacuation protocols when personnel accountability errors were identified, with authority to make immediate tactical decisions, prioritizing Marine safety over procedural compliance. The guidance referenced recent operations in Helmand Province without naming FOB Kestrel specifically, but everyone who read it understood exactly which incident had prompted the policy change. Chen continued serving as scout sniper, requested by multiple commanders based on her demonstrated capabilities and tactical judgment. The unauthorized nature of her most famous action became open secret throughout Marine Corps sniper community, discussed in conversations that never appeared in official documentation. Instructors at Scout Sniper School began using Ridge 7 as case study in tactical initiative, teaching students about balancing command structure with mission requirements in crisis situations. Rodriguez told Chun that some commanders avoided requesting her for missions specifically because of Ridge 7, concerned that she might disregard orders if she disagreed with tactical decisions. Chun understood their hesitation while noting the irony that saving 480 Marines made some leaders view her as liability rather than asset. The perception bothered her less than it concerned Rodriguez, who argued forcefully in commander meetings that her judgment had proven sound under extreme pressure. She received letter from Lieutenant Colonel Warner, the hearing officer who had presided over her preliminary hearing before Vance intervened. Warner wrote that he had struggled with the legal and moral questions Chen's case presented, ultimately concluding that military law sometimes provided an inadequate framework for evaluating actions taken in extreme circumstances. He stated that her willingness to accept career-ending consequences to save fellow Marines represented Marine Corps values at their highest expression, regardless of technical violations involved. Chun kept the letter filed with other correspondents, but didn't respond, uncertain how to articulate her thoughts about the situation. She hadn't viewed Ridge 7 as demonstration of Marine Corps values or tactical initiative requiring policy changes. The decision had been straightforward calculation that 480 lives were worth more than her career, and she remained somewhat baffled that the conclusion wasn't obvious to everyone involved. Davis asked her one evening if she regretted the decision given the legal complications and ongoing attention. Chun considered the question seriously before responding. 480 Marines were alive who would otherwise be dead. That outcome made every complication worthwhile, regardless of personal cost. Davis said most people wouldn't accept career destruction to save strangers, and Chen's willingness to do so made her exceptional. Chen disagreed with the characterization, arguing that any Marine would make the same choice given identical circumstances. The rescued Marines organized an informal gathering 8 weeks after the extraction, inviting Chun to join them at one of Camp Leatherneck's recreation facilities. She attended reluctantly, uncomfortable with celebrations focused on her actions. The Marines treated her arrival with a combination of reverence and genuine affection, individuals sharing their perspectives from inside the FOB perimeter while Chun had provided overwatch from above. Kirkwood presented her with photograph taken by drone during the extraction, showing Ridge 7 in foreground and 8 Chinooks loading Marines at FOB Kestrel in the valley below. The image captured the tactical geometry that had defined 5 hours of combat, single position overlooking defensive perimeter 800 meters distant. Kirkwood had the photograph mounted and framed, inscription reading simply Ridge 7 with the date. Chun accepted it with gratitude she struggled to express verbally. She returned to her quarters after the gathering and mounted the photograph on the wall beside her rack. The tactical image showed her position but not her presence, the ridge appearing empty in the drone's thermal imaging. Chun found the absence appropriate, preferring the focus remain on the 480 Marines who had held defensive perimeter rather than the sniper who had provided supporting fire. Rodriguez visited her quarters the following day and saw the mounted photograph. He commented that Ridge 7 would define her career regardless of how many successful missions followed. Chun acknowledged the reality while stating she hoped future operations would be equally successful with less controversy. Rodriguez laughed and said conventional success rarely generated Navy crosses or policy changes, suggesting Chun should accept that Ridge 7 represented pinnacle achievement most Marines never approached. She returned to routine patrol operations with Davis, conducting standard reconnaissance and overwatch missions across Helmand Province. The work was identical to operations before FOB Kestrel, but other units treated her differently now. Commanders requested her team for difficult missions, trusting her judgment in complex tactical situations. Junior Marines asked questions about precision shooting and tactical decision-making, viewing her as mentor worth learning from. Chun adapted to the altered perception while maintaining focus on mission requirements and team performance. Ridge 7 had changed how others viewed her capabilities, but it hadn't changed her understanding of her role or responsibilities. She remained Scout Sniper, conducting standard missions with her assigned partner, the Navy Cross and Ceremony, representing institutional recognition that felt disconnected from the actual work of providing precision fire support to ground forces. 18 months after Ridge 7, Chen stood in dress uniform at Camp Pendleton in California, preparing for promotion ceremony to Major. The promotion board had selected her ahead of schedule based on superior performance evaluations and combat decorations that distinguished her record from peer officers. Rodriguez had called 3 weeks earlier to inform her of the selection, noting with satisfaction that Ridge 7 had accelerated rather than derailed her career progression. The ceremony was scheduled for 1,400 hours in the base theater, standard venue for officer promotions attended by family and fellow Marines. Chun expected typical attendance of 20 to 30 people, the usual gathering for field-grade officer advancement. She arrived 30 minutes early for final uniform inspection and coordination with the presiding officer. Captain Williams from the protocol office met her outside the theater and mentioned unusual attendance numbers. Chun asked how many people had confirmed, expecting perhaps 50 given her Navy Cross and the attention Ridge 7 continued to generate within sniper community. Williams said they had stopped counting at 300 confirmed attendees and had opened additional seating in the theater balcony to accommodate overflow. Chen entered through the side door and saw the theater filling with Marines in dress uniforms, far more personnel than any promotion ceremony she had previously attended. She recognized Kirkwood in the third row with approximately 40 Marines from 2nd Battalion, the unit she'd supported at FOB Kestrel. Rodriguez sat in the front section with his family, having traveled from Quantico specifically for the ceremony. Davis occupied seat near the center aisle with their entire Scout Sniper platoon arranged around him. General Vance entered at 13:55, having flown from her current assignment at Marine Corps headquarters in Washington specifically to preside over the promotion. Her presence elevated the ceremony beyond routine advancement, transforming it into institutional recognition that Chen's career represented something worth celebrating at general officer level. Vance spoke briefly with Chun before the ceremony began, expressing satisfaction that Ridge 7 had resulted in accelerated promotion rather than court-martial. The ceremony commenced with standard military formality. Chen's accomplishments read from official record by the adjutant. Combat deployments, decorations including the Navy Cross, performance evaluations consistently rated superior, and recommendation for early promotion based on demonstrated leadership and tactical expertise. The formal language captured career progression without conveying the specific circumstances that had defined her service. Vance administered the oath of office for Major, Chen repeating the words she had spoken twice before at previous promotions. The oath remained identical regardless of rank, commitment to support and defend the Constitution unchanged by advancement. Vance then pinned the gold oak leaves on Chen's uniform, the insignia replacing the captain's bars she had worn for 4 years. After the formal promotion, Vance addressed the assembled Marines with remarks that departed from typical ceremony script. She spoke about tactical initiative and mission accomplishment, the balance between following orders and making decisions that situations demanded. Ridge 7 became centerpiece of her comments without being named directly, everyone present understanding the specific example illustrating her broader points about leadership. Vance stated that Marine Corps needed officers willing to accept personal risk for mission accomplishment, leaders who prioritized Marines' lives over procedural compliance when circumstances required difficult choices. Chun represented that leadership philosophy at its best, demonstrating judgment under pressure that saved 480 lives while accepting potential career destruction as acceptable cost. The general concluded by noting that Chen's promotion ahead of schedule sent clear institutional message. The Marine Corps valued tactical excellence and commitment to fellow Marines above rigid adherence to protocols that sometimes proved inadequate for complex situations. The applause following Vance's remarks lasted nearly 2 minutes, 480 specific individuals in attendance understanding personally what her words meant. After the ceremony concluded, the receiving line extended through the theater and into the lobby as Marines waited to congratulate Chun personally. Kirkwood and his Marines approached first, many of them meeting Chun for the first time despite Ridge 7 occurring 18 months earlier. They expressed gratitude with handshakes and brief comments, some emotional despite the formal military setting. One Lance Corporal, Martinez, told Chun he had been certain he would die at FOB Kestrel until her first shot stopped the Taliban advance. The certainty of imminent death had been absolute, and then suddenly precision fire from unknown location had begun eliminating enemy fighters with mechanical efficiency. Martinez said the transition from accepting death to recognizing they might survive remained the most profound moment of his life. Chun didn't know how to respond to testimonials about saving lives and profound moments. She repeated variations of the same statement throughout the receiving line, that she had simply provided tactical support that the situation required. The Marines seemed disappointed by her modest characterization, wanting her to acknowledge the exceptional nature of her actions. Chun remained uncomfortable with that acknowledgement, viewing Ridge 7 as straightforward decision rather than heroic gesture requiring special recognition. Rodriguez approached after the 2nd Battalion Marines had finished, embracing Chun with genuine affection before congratulating her on the promotion. He said watching her career progression after Ridge 7 had been personally satisfying, vindication of his original assessment at Scout Sniper School that she possessed exceptional capabilities. Chun thanked him for the support and testimony that had complicated his own career during the legal proceedings. Rodriguez dismissed her concern about his career complications, stating that supporting her had been correct decision regardless of personal cost. His Bronze Star and promotion to Major had followed despite his role in the controversy, suggesting the Marine Corps had ultimately recognized that everyone involved at FOB Kestrel had acted appropriately given impossible circumstances. Davis congratulated her with characteristic brevity, stating she deserved the promotion and he looked forward to continuing as her spotter once they returned to operational status. Their partnership had survived Ridge 7's attention and would continue through subsequent deployments. Chun valued the continuity more than the promotion itself. Professional relationships built over years of operations, together providing stability against the disruption of unexpected recognition. The reception continued for 2 hours, Chun speaking with Marines she had never met who wanted to express appreciation for Ridge 7 or discuss tactical details of the engagement. She answered questions about shot distances and wind calculations, more comfortable with technical discussion than emotional gratitude. Several younger Marines asked about decision-making process that led her to return toward FOB Kestrel against orders, seeking insight into how she had weighed competing principles. Chun told them the decision had involved no complex weighing of principles. 480 Marines would die without immediate support. She possessed capability to provide that support, therefore, she provided it. The simplicity of her explanation seemed to frustrate questioners who expected more nuanced analysis of the ethical and legal dimensions. She had no nuanced analysis to offer, the calculus having been straightforward from her perspective. As afternoon turned to evening and attendance began dispersing, Kirkwood approached Chun one final time before departing. He wanted her to understand that 127 of the rescued Marines had traveled to Camp Pendleton specifically for her promotion ceremony, taking leave and paying travel costs to witness her advancement. The attendance represented the largest gathering of witnesses for promotion ceremony in recent Marine Corps history, according to protocol office records. Chun was genuinely surprised by the statistic, having assumed most attendees were stationed at Camp Pendleton or nearby bases. Kirkwood explained that 2nd Battalion Marines viewed her promotion as their promotion, shared celebration of the success they had achieved together at FOB Kestrel. Her advancement validated their survival and recognized that Ridge 7 represented something worthy of institutional honor. She thanked Kirkwood for organizing the attendance, while stating that his Marine survival had been their own accomplishment through defensive discipline and accurate fire. Kirkwood rejected the modest characterization, insisting that defensive discipline would have been irrelevant if Taliban forces had overrun their positions in the first hour. Chen's precision fire had provided the time and tactical advantages Marines needed to hold until rescue arrived. The conversation ended as it had begun, with fundamental disagreement about who deserved credit for FOB Kestrel's successful outcome. Chen viewed herself as supporting element to Kirkwood's defensive operation, while Kirkwood viewed her as critical enabler without whom his defense would have failed. Both perspectives contained truth, the successful outcome resulting from their combined efforts rather than either individual contribution. Chun drove back to her quarters that evening with the oak leaves feeling unfamiliar on her uniform collar. The promotion represented career advancement she had worked toward through multiple deployments and consistent performance. But Ridge 7 had accelerated the timeline and transformed routine advancement into institutional statement about Marine Corps values and priorities. She thought about Vance's remarks during the ceremony, the emphasis on tactical initiative and mission accomplishment over procedural compliance. The general had framed Chen's unauthorized action as exemplifying leadership philosophy the Marine Corps needed to cultivate. Chen remained uncertain whether that framing was accurate or convenient narrative that rationalized command decision to dismiss court-martial charges. The question felt less important than the outcome. 480 Marines had survived, her career had survived, and Marine Corps doctrine had evolved to authorize field commanders to make similar decisions in future emergencies. Those tangible results mattered more than abstract debates about whether she had demonstrated exemplary leadership or simply made obvious choice in impossible situation. Major Chun returned to operational assignment 6 weeks after her promotion ceremony, assigned to instructor duty at Scout Sniper School in Quantico. The posting was standard career progression for field-grade officers with combat experience, opportunity to train next generation of Marine snipers using lessons learned during multiple deployments. Rodriguez had held similar position 3 years earlier, teaching the class where Chun had been top graduate. The school's commanding officer, Colonel Reeves, briefed Chun on her specific responsibilities during in-processing. She would instruct advanced marksmanship and tactical decision-making modules, teaching students who had already passed basic qualification and were developing expertise required for operational deployment. Reeves mentioned that enrollment had increased 20% since Ridge 7, with additional Marines requesting sniper training specifically because of her publicized action. Chen began teaching her first class on Monday morning. 23 students ranging from Lance Corporal to Staff Sergeant assembled in the classroom awaiting instruction. She introduced herself with standard credentials, deployments, and qualifications without mentioning decorations or specific operations. The students knew her background regardless, Ridge 7 having been incorporated into school curriculum as case study in tactical initiative. Her lesson plan focused on precision shooting at extended ranges, the technical aspects of wind reading and trajectory calculation that determine success or failure at distances beyond 800 meters. Chen walked students through mathematical formulas and practical estimation techniques, emphasizing consistent methodology over intuitive guessing. The technical instruction felt comfortable, concrete skills she could teach through demonstration and repetition. One student, Corporal Hassan, asked about decision-making under pressure when technical factors competed with tactical urgency. The question was clearly about Ridge 7 without naming it directly, seeking her perspective on balancing perfect shot placement against rapidly evolving combat situations. Chen answered that perfect was enemy of good enough, and tactical situations rarely permitted ideal conditions for engagement. She told them about firing 23 rounds in 40 minutes during the first Taliban assault, accepting shot opportunities that were adequate rather than waiting for perfect presentation that might never come. Every second spent waiting for marginal improvement in shot quality was second enemy fighters used to advance toward defensive perimeter. Speed and volume sometimes mattered more than absolute precision when tactical situation demanded suppressive effect over single perfect shot. Hassan pressed the question further, asking how she had decided to return to FOB Kestrel against direct orders. The classroom went quiet as other students waited for her response to the explicit reference. Chun considered deflecting, but recognized the question as a legitimate request for guidance about principles that govern tactical decision-making beyond standard operating procedures. She told them about the calculation she had made at Rally Point Falcon. 480 Marines would die without immediate support. Official rescue timeline made authorized channels insufficient. She possessed unique capability to provide needed support from Ridge 7 position. The decision reduced to comparing value of her career against value of 480 lives. That comparison made the choice obvious despite legal complications. Staff Sergeant Kumar asked if she would make the same decision, knowing it could result in court-martial and dishonorable discharge. Chun said yes without hesitation. Kumar asked what advice she would give students facing similar situations where following orders might result in preventable deaths. Chun paused before answering, aware that her response would be quoted and discussed beyond the classroom. She told them that military discipline and command structure enabled large-scale operations through coordinated action under unified authority. Following orders was a fundamental principle that made military effectiveness possible. But discipline served mission accomplishment rather than existing for its own sake, and situations occasionally arose where rigid compliance with orders produced worse outcomes than tactical initiative that violated procedures. Those situations were rare and required honest assessment of several factors. Did you possess capability that others lacked? Was authorized timeline insufficient for the emergency? Would following orders result in preventable catastrophic failure? Could you achieve mission success through unauthorized action? If those conditions aligned, initiative might be justified despite legal risk. But she emphasized that claiming similar justification required meeting all those conditions simultaneously. Disagreeing with orders because you had different opinion about tactics was insufficient justification for disobedience. Convenience or personal preference never justified violating command structure. Initiative was reserved for genuinely exceptional circumstances where authorized approaches would fail catastrophically. Kumar asked how to distinguish genuine emergency from situation where you simply disagreed with command decision. Chun said that genuine emergencies involved imminent, preventable deaths and capability you alone possessed to prevent them. If you couldn't clearly articulate both elements, you were probably just disagreeing with tactics rather than facing genuine emergency requiring initiative. The discussion continued through the class period, students asking increasingly specific questions about balancing discipline with initiative. Chun answered honestly while emphasizing that Ridge 7 represented extreme outlier rather than template for routine operations. Following orders remained default principle. Initiative was rare exception requiring extraordinary justification. After class concluded, Reeves asked Chun to join him in his office. He had observed her instruction through the classroom monitor and wanted to discuss her teaching approach regarding tactical initiative and disobedience of orders. Chun prepared for criticism about encouraging insubordination, recognizing that her answers might have crossed boundaries of appropriate instruction. Reeves surprised her by expressing approval of her teaching methodology. She had provided honest perspective on complex issues while emphasizing that initiative was exception rather than rule. Her framework for evaluating when initiative might be justified gave students concrete principles rather than vague guidance about using judgment. The Marine Corps needed junior snipers who understood both the importance of discipline and the rare circumstances where initiative superseded compliance. He told her that Ridge 7 would inevitably be referenced in her classes regardless of whether she mentioned it directly. Students knew her background and viewed her as authoritative source on tactical decision-making under pressure. Reeves wanted her to engage those discussions honestly rather than avoiding them, using her experience to teach principles that case studies alone couldn't convey. Chun taught additional classes over subsequent weeks, covering various aspects of sniper operations from camouflage and concealment to target selection and ammunition management. Ridge 7 entered discussions regularly as students sought her perspective on specific decisions she had made during the 5-hour engagement. She answered their questions while redirecting focus toward underlying principles applicable to other situations. One afternoon, she taught ballistics and trajectory calculation, walking students through the mathematics that govern bullet flight over long distances. Corporal Washington asked about the 847-meter shot that eliminated the Taliban commander during the first assault. Chun explained the wind conditions and elevation correction she had calculated, demonstrating on the whiteboard how she had arrived at specific scope adjustment. Washington asked if she had felt pressure knowing that 480 lives depended on her accuracy. Chun said she had felt pressure but couldn't afford to let it affect shot execution. Pressure was mental state that degraded performance if you focused on it. So she had focused on wind and range instead. The technical aspects were controllable, the stakes were not. So she concentrated on what she could influence and trusted her training for the rest. The answers seemed to resonate with students more than abstract discussions about decision-making or initiative. Chin recognized that teaching technical competence was ultimately more valuable than philosophical debates about when to disobey orders. Technical skill enabled effective action regardless of whether that action was authorized or not, and students needed both competence and judgment to serve effectively as snipers. Rodriguez visited Quantico during Chin's third month of instructor duty, conducting official evaluation of the school's curriculum and instructional methods. He observed several of Chin's classes and provided feedback during their evening meeting at the Officers Club. Rodriguez said she had developed into excellent instructor, combining technical expertise with honest discussion of complex ethical issues that Marine Corps often avoided addressing directly. Chin asked if he thought her teaching about tactical initiative was appropriate or if she should emphasize following orders more heavily. Rodriguez said the Marine Corps sent mixed messages about initiative, officially emphasizing obedience while simultaneously rewarding successful violations when outcomes justified the risk. Chin's teaching acknowledged that contradiction honestly rather than pretending it didn't exist. He told her that multiple students from her classes had submitted positive evaluations specifically mentioning her willingness to discuss Ridge 7 and tactical decision-making. The students appreciated her honesty about mistakes and complications rather than presenting sanitized version where everything worked perfectly. Real operations involved uncertainty and risk, and students benefited from understanding that reality before facing it in combat. Chun continued instructor duties through the remainder of her assignment, teaching hundreds of Marines over 18 months while refining her methodology for addressing complex leadership questions. The position provided perspective on how Ridge 7 functioned as teaching tool, the specific circumstances less important than principles they illustrated about mission accomplishment and tactical judgment. Near the end of her instructor tour, Reeves informed her that she was being assigned to operations officer position with 1st Marine Division, responsible for planning and coordinating sniper employment across the division's area of operations. The assignment represented continued career advancement, senior staff position where her tactical expertise and combat experience would inform broader operational planning. Chun accepted the assignment while recognizing that Ridge 7 would continue defining how others viewed her capabilities regardless of subsequent assignments. The Navy Cross and Rescue of 480 Marines had become permanent aspects of her professional identity, referenced in fitness reports and considered by promotion boards evaluating her future potential. She completed her final class at Scout Sniper School on a Friday afternoon, teaching the same advanced marksmanship module she had taught on her first day. The students asked similar questions about technical calculations and tactical decisions, seeking practical guidance they could apply during operational deployments. Chun provided the same concrete answers she had developed over 18 months, principles drawn from experience that transcended specific circumstances of any individual engagement. 4 years after Ridge 7, Major Chun attended the annual Marine Corps Scout Sniper Association Symposium in San Diego, gathering that brought together active duty and retired snipers for professional development and networking. The association had invited her as keynote speaker, requesting presentation on tactical decision-making under pressure. Chun had initially declined the invitation before Rodriguez convinced her that sharing her experience served institutional purpose beyond personal comfort. The symposium occupied Conference Center near Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, 300 attendees filling the main hall for Thursday evening's keynote address. Chun stood backstage reviewing her presentation notes. Organized outline covering the technical and tactical aspects of Ridge 7 without excessive focus on the legal controversy that had surrounded her actions. She intended to emphasize replicable principles rather than unique circumstances. The association president introduced her with brief biography emphasizing her Navy Cross, multiple combat deployments, and current assignment as operations officer with 1st Marine Division. The introduction mentioned Ridge 7 only obliquely, referencing her role in successful defense of forward operating base Kestrel during emergency evacuation operations. Chun appreciated the professional framing that acknowledged the action without sensationalizing it. She began her presentation with tactical overview of the situation at FOB Kestrel. 480 Marines abandoned during evacuation, with Taliban forces approaching and rescue timeline measured in hours rather than minutes. The audience consisted entirely of experienced snipers who immediately understood the tactical geometry she described. Elevated position overlooking defensive perimeter with clear fields of fire across all approach vectors. Chun walked through her decision process at Rally Point Falcon, the calculation that led her to return toward FOB Kestrel despite explicit orders to remain in place. She presented it as risk-benefit analysis rather than heroic gesture, comparing probable outcome if she followed orders against probable outcome if she provided unauthorized support. The mathematics heavily favored unauthorized action despite legal consequences. Several attendees nodded as she described the calculation, recognizing similar mental processes they had employed during their own operations. Chun continued with technical discussion of the 5-hour engagement, shot distances ranging from 400 to 950 meters, wind conditions, and elevation corrections, target selection prioritizing tactical effect over simple body count. She displayed photographs from the drone footage, tactical imagery showing her position on Ridge 7 and Taliban forces approaching across the valley floor. The images provided visual context for the ranges and terrain she described, helping audience understand the technical challenges involved in sustained precision fire across varying distances and environmental conditions. One photograph showed the moment when Chinook helicopters approached to deliver ammunition resupply, the aircraft under fire, while crew chief kicked supply crate from the open ramp. Chun explained the desperation of that moment. Down to 12 rounds with Taliban assault developing and no certainty that resupply would arrive before her ammunition exhausted completely. The presentation continued through the extraction phase, 8 helicopters loading 480 Marines, while she maintained overwatch preventing Taliban interference. Chun concluded with outcome statistics: 187 confirmed enemy casualties against 0 friendly killed and 11 wounded. The numbers represented complete tactical success regardless of legal complications that followed. During the question period, retired Master Sergeant Donovan asked about the court-martial proceedings and how she had prepared for potential career destruction. Chun answered honestly that she had made minimal preparation because the outcome felt inevitable. She had violated clear orders. The violations were documented with perfect evidence, and she expected dishonorable discharge as a logical consequence of her actions. Donovan pressed further, asking how she had reconciled accepting career destruction with her commitment to Marine Corps service. Chun said she hadn't reconciled them. The two values had simply conflicted, and she had prioritized immediate preservation of 480 lives over long-term career continuation. Some decisions required accepting painful consequences, and that acceptance was part of making difficult choices. Active duty Captain Morrison, no relation to the colonel from FOB Kestrel, asked about General Vance's intervention and dismissal charges. Chen explained that Vance had prioritized mission accomplishment over procedural compliance, making command decision that Chen's tactical success justified her violations. Morrison asked if Chun agreed with that assessment or if she thought she should have faced court-martial despite the outcome. Chun paused before answering, considering the question seriously rather than providing reflexive response. She said she understood both perspectives. Military discipline required consequences for disobeying orders, maintaining command structure that enabled large-scale operations. But mission accomplishment sometimes demanded actions that violated normal procedures, and punishing successful initiative created perverse incentive against effective action in crisis situations. She stated that she would have accepted court-martial as appropriate consequence of her decision to disobey orders. But she also recognized that Vance's dismissal of charges sent important institutional message about Marine Corps priorities. The general had decided that saving 480 lives mattered more than punishing violations, and Chen couldn't argue that decision was wrong even if it personally benefited her. Staff Sergeant Williams asked what advice Chun would give to snipers facing similar situations where following orders conflicted with preventing deaths. Chun repeated the framework she taught at Scout Sniper School, the conditions that might justify tactical initiative over compliance. Unique capability, insufficient authorized timeline, preventable catastrophic failure, achievable mission success through unauthorized action. She emphasized that all conditions needed to align simultaneously, rare convergence that made Ridge 7 exceptional case rather than template for routine operations. Williams asked how to know if you were making honest assessment versus rationalizing decision you wanted to make anyway. Chun said you probably couldn't know with certainty in the moment, which meant accepting legal risk as part of taking initiative. The symposium continued through the weekend with technical workshops and training demonstrations. Multiple attendees approached Chun during breaks asking detailed questions about Ridge 7, seeking specific information about shot techniques or decision processes. She answered their questions while redirecting conversation toward principles applicable beyond her specific circumstances. Saturday evening, the association hosted dinner recognizing retiring snipers and presenting awards for various achievements. Chen sat at head table with other speakers and association leadership, watching ceremony honor Marines who had served with distinction throughout their careers. The presentations emphasized sustained excellence over decades rather than single dramatic actions, recognizing that most sniper operations involve patient professionalism rather than crisis intervention. After the ceremony concluded, retired Sergeant Major Patterson approached Chun asking if they could speak privately. They moved to a quieter section of the conference center where Patterson explained that he had been Scout Sniper instructor 30 years earlier, teaching generation of Marines who had since retired from service. He wanted Chun to understand how Ridge 7 had affected the sniper community beyond immediate tactical success. Patterson said that every sniper instructor now taught Ridge 7 as case study in tactical initiative, using her decision as framework for discussing when and how to exercise judgment beyond standard procedures. The case had become foundational example of principles the Marine Corps valued, but struggled to articulate clearly. Chen's willingness to accept career destruction for mission accomplishment provided concrete illustration of abstract values. He told her that recruitment for sniper training had increased significantly after Ridge 7, with Marines specifically requesting the pipeline because they wanted to develop capabilities Chun had demonstrated. The increased interest meant more qualified snipers deploying to operational units, broader distribution of precision engagement capability across the Marine Corps. Her action had generated institutional benefits extending far beyond the 480 Marines she had directly saved. Chun thanked Patterson for the perspective while noting that she hadn't intended to generate institutional benefits or serve as teaching example. Patterson smiled and said the best examples rarely intended their exemplary status. Authentic actions under pressure revealed character more clearly than calculated demonstrations designed for observation. Sunday morning, Chun delivered her final presentation, Technical Workshop on Advanced Shooting Techniques for Extended Ranges. The session focused on concrete skills rather than philosophical discussions, practical methods for calculating corrections, and managing equipment under field conditions. She preferred teaching technical competence to discussing her personal experiences, concrete knowledge that students could immediately apply. The symposium concluded with closing remarks from association leadership, thanking speakers and participants. Chun prepared to depart when Kirkwood appeared unexpectedly, having attended the symposium without informing her in advance. He explained that 23 Marines from 2nd Battalion were present at the conference, all of them scout snipers now who had requested the training pipeline after surviving FOB Kestrel. Kirkwood introduced her to the group, young Marines who had been lance corporals and privates during the siege and were now sergeants and staff sergeants with multiple deployments and advanced qualifications. They thanked Chun for Ridge 7 and explained how the experience had influenced their career decisions, wanting to develop capabilities that could make similar difference in crisis situations. Chun felt uncomfortable with the testimony about influencing career decisions, preferring to view Ridge 7 as isolated incident rather than inspirational example. But the Marines persisted in explaining their motivations, describing how watching precision fire eliminate threats from invisible position had demonstrated the strategic value of sniper capability. They wanted to provide that capability for other Marines facing similar circumstances. She listened to their explanations and recognized that her discomfort with inspirational narrative didn't change how others had interpreted her actions. Ridge 7 functioned as teaching moment and recruiting tool regardless of whether she embraced those roles. The institutional impact was real, even if she found it awkward to acknowledge personally. Chun departed San Diego Sunday afternoon, driving back to Camp Pendleton while processing the weekend's discussions. The symposium had reinforced that Ridge 7 would permanently define how the sniper community viewed her service, singular action that overshadowed everything else she had accomplished during her career. She remained uncertain whether that legacy was deserved or simply a result of dramatic circumstances that made routine tactical skill appear exceptional. 7 years after Ridge 7, Lieutenant Colonel Chun conducted her final inspection tour of 1st Marine Division's sniper detachments before transferring to her next assignment at Marine Corps Headquarters in Washington. The tour took her through Camp Pendleton's training ranges where young Marines practiced the same fundamentals she had learned 15 years earlier as new Scout sniper student. She watched them calculate wind corrections and adjust for elevation, technical skills that remained constant even as equipment and doctrine evolved. The lead instructor, Staff Sergeant Kumar, former student from her time at Scout Sniper School, briefed Chun on the current class performance and training progression. Kumar mentioned that enrollment continued trending upward, sustained interest in sniper training that had begun after FOB Kestrel, and showed no signs of declining. The pipeline graduated approximately 40% more snipers annually compared to pre-Ridge 7 numbers, expanding precision engagement capability across operational units. Chun asked Kumar if instructors still taught Ridge 7 as case study in tactical initiative. Kumar confirmed they did, using the engagement as framework for discussing mission accomplishment versus procedural compliance. The case had become permanent part of curriculum, referenced whenever students asked about decision-making under pressure or situations where standard procedures might prove insufficient. She walked the firing line, observing students engage targets at 800 meters, the distance where precision shooting transitioned from mechanical skill to art requiring judgment and experience. One student, Lance Corporal Davis, no relation to her former spotter, asked Chun about maintaining accuracy under stress when lives depended on shot placement. Chun told him the same thing she had told previous students, that stress degraded performance if you focused on it, so you focused on technical factors instead. Davis asked specifically about the first shot at FOB Kestrel, the 847-meter engagement that eliminated the Taliban commander and stopped the initial assault. Chun explained her process, the wind reading and range calculation that produced correct elevation and windage corrections. Davis asked if she had felt pressure, knowing the outcome would determine whether 480 Marines survived. Chun said yes, but the pressure had been abstract while wind and distance were concrete, so she worked the concrete problem and trusted her training for the rest. The answer satisfied Davis, who returned to his shooting position and resumed engaging targets. Kumar told Chun that students always asked about that first shot, viewing it as a defining moment where everything could have gone wrong if she had missed. Chun said the shot had been routine by training standards, nothing technically exceptional about the execution. Kumar responded that routine excellence under catastrophic circumstances was exactly what made it exceptional. After completing the range inspection, Chun drove to 2nd Battalion's headquarters building, where Kirkwood now served as battalion commander with rank of lieutenant colonel. They had maintained professional relationship through the years, occasional correspondence, and coordination on training exercises. Kirkwood had invited Chun to join him for final meeting before her transfer to Washington. They met in Kirkwood's office overlooking the base parade ground. Afternoon sun streaming through windows as they discussed their respective careers and upcoming assignments. Kirkwood would deploy to Okinawa in 3 months, commanding 2nd Battalion during rotational deployment to Asia-Pacific region. Chun would begin staff duty at headquarters, coordinating sniper employment policy across the entire Marine Corps. Kirkwood asked if headquarters assignment felt like appropriate next step or if she would have preferred continuing operational billets. Chun said she was ready for staff work, the opportunity to influence broader policy based on operational experience gained during multiple deployments. Tactical expertise mattered less at headquarters than understanding how tactical requirements connected to institutional capabilities and resource allocation. He told her that 2nd Battalion maintained memorial in their headquarters building commemorating FOB Kestrel. Simple display with photograph of Ridge 7 and list of the 480 Marines who had survived the siege. The memorial included Chen's name alongside other key participants, permanent recognition of shared experience that had defined the battalion's history. Chen hadn't known about the memorial and wasn't certain how she felt about permanent installation focused on 5 hours of her career. Kirkwood said the memorial served important function for the battalion. Reminder that tactical discipline and precision supporting fires could achieve impossible outcomes when properly coordinated. Every new Marine joining 2nd Battalion learned about FOB Kestrel during their orientation, understanding that their unit's survival had depended on refusing to quit despite overwhelming odds. Chen's role in that survival was factual history rather than embellishment. She appreciated Kirkwood's perspective while maintaining her discomfort with memorialization of actions she considered straightforward tactical necessity. The conversation reflected ongoing tension between her view of Ridge 7 as obvious decision and others' view of it as exceptional demonstration of Marine Corps values. Chen had never resolved that tension and suspected she never would. They concluded their meeting with mutual wishes for successful tours in their upcoming assignments. Kirkwood thanked Chen again for FOB Kestrel, acknowledging that his gratitude probably made her uncomfortable but expressing it anyway. Chun accepted his thanks with the same awkwardness she had felt 7 years earlier, unable to articulate response that honored his sincerity while maintaining her belief that she had simply done what circumstances required. Chen's final official function before departing 1st Marine Division was ceremonial formation, recognizing officers transferring to new assignments. She stood with 6 other field-grade officers while the division commander read their orders and congratulated them on their service. The commander mentioned each officer's significant accomplishments, and Chen's citation naturally referenced her Navy Cross and role in rescuing 480 Marines during combat operations in Afghanistan. After the ceremony, dozens of Marines approached congratulating her on the assignment and thanking her for her service with the division. Many mentioned Ridge 7 specifically, sharing how the story had influenced their understanding of tactical initiative and mission accomplishment. Chun listened politely while repeating variations of appreciation for their service and wishes for their continued success. Davis, her former spotter who had witnessed her departure from Rally Point Falcon 7 years earlier, appeared in the crowd and embraced Chun with obvious emotion. He had retired from active duty 2 years earlier and was working as contractor on base, drawn to the ceremony specifically to see Chun before she transferred. Davis said working with her had been the highlight of his Marine Corps career, partnership built on trust and competence that had produced exceptional results across multiple deployments. Chun told Davis that their partnership had been equally valuable to her, professional relationship that had enabled mission success through countless operations, including Ridge 7. Davis laughed and said Ridge 7 had been slightly more significant than countless other operations, given that it had saved 480 lives and generated institutional policy changes. Chun conceded the point while noting that their other operations had also mattered to the Marines they had supported. She departed Camp Pendleton the following Monday, driving north toward Washington and her new assignment at headquarters. The Pacific coastline stretched beside the highway. Familiar geography she had known throughout her career serving with West Coast-based units. Chun reflected on 15 years of service defined disproportionately by 5 hours on Ridge 7, single engagement that had overshadowed everything else she had accomplished. The reflection made her wonder how others processed moments when their entire careers became defined by brief actions during extreme circumstances. She thought about Chun watching those young snipers absorb her lessons, how one person's decision rippled across 480 lives and changed military doctrine forever. Stories like Ridge 7 made you consider those moments when someone broke rules for right reasons, when following orders would have meant abandoning people who desperately needed help. What would you have done in her position? She thought, faced with choice between career and 480 strangers who would die without your intervention. Would you accept court-martial as price of keeping them alive? Would you climb that ridge knowing rescue was hours away and ammunition was finite? The questions felt relevant beyond military context, applicable to anyone facing impossible choice between personal cost and preventing harm to others. These kinds of stories spark conversations about duty and sacrifice, about recognizing when rules serve their purpose and when they prevented necessary action. The comment sections on military forums were filled with people sharing their own moments of impossible choices, times they had risked everything for principles that mattered more than personal safety. Real discussions happened in those spaces, people wrestling honestly with what they would do if they faced Ridge 7 themselves. Chun arrived in Washington Thursday evening, checking in a temporary lodging before beginning her headquarters assignment Monday morning. She unpacked her uniforms and arranged her office materials, preparing for transition from tactical operations to institutional policy development. The Navy Cross sat in its presentation case among her personal effects, physical reminder of Ridge 7 that would accompany her through remaining years of service. She opened her laptop and reviewed the assignment description for her new position, responsibilities for coordinating sniper employment doctrine and capability development across the Marine Corps. The position would leverage her operational experience to inform institutional decisions about training, equipment, and tactical employment. Ridge 7 would inevitably inform those decisions, her understanding of precision engagement under pressure providing framework for policy recommendations. Chun recognized that her discomfort with Ridge 7's prominence in her career record was ultimately irrelevant to the institutional value it provided. The Marine Corps had incorporated lessons from that engagement into doctrine and training, improving capability for future operations regardless of whether she viewed her actions as exceptional or routine. Her perspective mattered less than the tangible improvements generated by honest examination of what had occurred. She closed her laptop and looked out the window at Washington's evening skyline, city lights marking the capital where she would spend the next phase of her career. 15 years of service had brought her from Scout Sniper School through multiple combat deployments to headquarters assignment, where her experience would shape future Marine Corps capability. Ridge 7 remained the defining event of that journey, 5 hours that had saved 480 lives and validated tactical initiative as essential component of mission accomplishment. The legacy felt larger than she was comfortable carrying, but discomfort didn't change the reality of what had occurred or its lasting impact. Chun had made decision under pressure that most people would never face, choosing immediate action over procedural compliance when the alternative meant preventable deaths. That choice had proven correct by every measurable outcome, and the Marine Corps had adapted its doctrine accordingly. Whether she viewed herself as exceptional or simply competent was ultimately less important than the lives saved and lessons learned from that morning on Ridge 7.